Hello and welcome to GameSack. It's time to take a look at the primitive entries in the Castlevania series, starting with the very first game. Now, just because these are running on primitive hardware doesn't mean they're not worth spending a ton of time playing. But is each entry a good game? Well, let's find out. And I'll be taking a look at these in the order that they were released. The first Castlevania was released in Japan on the Famicom Disk System as Akumajo Dracula in late September of 1986, North America in mid-1987, and Europe in late 1988. This is a straight-up action game where you play the role of Simon Belmont and his quest to rid the world of the evil Count Dracula. You're armed with a whip as your weapon, and this really made the game stand out back then. Your whip is slow, and this was hardly common in video games. However, if you grabbed a chain whip icon, you can power up your whip as well as lengthen it slightly. Insert your own joke about male genitalia here. This can be done twice. You also have sub-weapons that you can get, and you use these by pressing up and attack. These consist of the axe, which can be tossed in an arc. There's also the cross, or the boomerang, which is often called the Cross of Fear in Japan, and it returns to you when you throw it. Then there's the knife, which is a fairly fast but weak weapon. Of course, there's the clock, which stops the time on some enemies, but it doesn't work everywhere, and it's just, I don't like this one. Lastly, there's the holy water, which can freeze enemies in this game. As a result, it's the best sub-weapon to have for most of the bosses, in this particular game anyway. In order to use the sub-weapons, you need to collect hearts. Hearts don't refill your life here like they do in nearly every other video game on the planet. It's kind of a weird item to collect to stock your ammo. You can also collect 2 and 3 multipliers so you can toss more than one sub-weapon at once quickly. This game is pretty damn tough, at least until you learn everything about it. I mean, that could be said with pretty much any game, I suppose, but this one is a bit tougher than most games are for the uninitiated. What's really brutal is the stiff control. Once you jump, you're committed to it. No turning around once you're in the air here. Fortunately, every time you go through a door, you reach a checkpoint. There's usually 2 doors per level, or block as they call them here, and each checkpoint counts as its own stage. In all, there are 18 stages. If you have to continue, you start over from the very beginning of the block. The enemies here are all awesome and would be staples in nearly every game in this series that would follow. Easy skeletons, wimpy ghouls, annoying Medusa heads, and red skeletons who crumble after a couple of hits but come back to life seconds later. The same can be said for the bosses like the giant bat or movie monsters like the mummies or Frankenstein's monster. And let's not forget the Grim Reaper. The graphics are great for the time, and I still like them today. There's no mistaking this for any other game. It has those blocky stairs and this tiled feel that you just associate with Castlevania. And the music, oh the music. It's absolutely classic with tunes like Vampire Killer, which plays on the first block. This tune would be heard in most future Castlevania games in one form or another. All of the other music here is fantastic as well. As you can imagine, the game was a hit, and that would mean plenty more games in the future for us to kill Dracula in. Vampire Killer was released about a month later on the MSX2 in Japan. It was also released later in Europe and Brazil. I'm playing the Japanese version here in case the title screen didn't clue you in. This is basically a retelling of the same game. You're playing as Simon Belmont trying to kill Dracula with your whip. Other than that, it's almost completely different, at least in regards to how the game is structured. Like many MSX games, there's no scrolling at all. Instead, you advance from screen to screen in maze-like stages. Most of the enemies here are the same, and there's certainly no shortage of them. The control is decent, but when whipping candles you need to hit their base instead of the candles themselves or your whip will go right through them. Here, you need to wander around and find keys in order to unlock doors. There's also lots of items to collect in this one, like wings and shields. Your sub-weapons are here, but I felt they were slightly tricky to use at first. Anyway, once you figure out the stage and get the skeleton key, you can fight the boss. The graphics here aren't bad at all and are very similar to the NES version, though some of the color schemes are sometimes different. The music is the same as the NES version, except that it sounds like a Sega Master System with its PSG sound chip. I think that this is an interesting take on Castlevania, but you'll need some patience. That, combined with a lot of skill, might get you to the end. Dracula II was released next on disc for the Famicom in 1987, and as Castlevania II: Simon's Quest on cartridge everywhere else on the NES in 1988 and 1990. They must have liked Vampire Killer on the MSX2 because they took it to a whole new level here. This one wants to be really tricksy. You're playing as Simon Belmont again, and apparently you suck at killing Dracula because he placed a curse on you right before he died. Now you need to go collect all of his pieces and battle him again to get rid of the curse. This one is not a linear game. It's almost a Metroidvania, in fact. You can wander around the areas as you please. Some areas will make short work of you if you attempt them before you're ready. You have items to find and buy, and you even level up. The leveling up system is weird because you can't just grind like you can in Metroidvania games. You'll grind sometimes, but more for hearts. Anyway, there are 6 mansions in the game, and you can level up once before you conquer each castle. Your experience is half the number of hearts you have. It's pretty weird, but you don't have to worry too much about it. The hearts serve as your currency in this game, though some weapons like this golden dagger actually do consume hearts when you use them. Others, like the holy water, do not. You have towns which have people you can talk to. Be careful though, because some of them are lying jerks! You can also heal at the church if the town has one. There are also stores to buy stuff, but they're not just inside doors, oh no. Instead, you have to bust out the floor with your holy water to find the merchants. I doubt they sell very much of their inventory this way. I imagine they're just hiding from all of the evil demons around. When you're out and about, the sun will suddenly set and then it's night. That means the enemies are twice as strong, but they drop bigger hearts. Unfortunately, the town people all hide at night and the churches are closed, so there's not much else you can do except grind for hearts and wait till daytime. This is an interesting mechanic, but it gets annoying pretty quick, and I honestly don't feel that it adds anything of value to the game. Is there anyone who actually likes this? The mansions and castles themselves are pretty cool. However, there are a lot of hidden pits that look like floors, so you need to be really careful. You find a guy inside and you buy a wooden stake from him and use it on a crystal to get a piece of Dracula. Then it's off to the next area once you figure out the quirks to get there. The controls are still stiff, but they're not quite as bad as the first Castlevania. There's lots of stuff to switch around in the inventory screen, which sometimes feels like it's not responding. Also, this game lets you save your progress in the Japanese disc version. To work around this, Konami added a password feature for the international cartridge release. You can choose to see it when you lose your last life. If you enter it, you'll start from the first town with all of your progress intact, though you'll have 0 hearts. You can also back out of the password screen after you've written it down just to continue from right there. The game even has 3 different endings depending on how much you suck. The graphics are once again well done with lots of new enemies and backgrounds. It looks like a Castlevania game for sure, but Simon's Quest here has its own aesthetic that feels more advanced than the first game. The music is once again outstanding, and the familiar Bloody Tears is introduced here for the first time. Introduced for the first time? Yeah, that's not redundant. The rest of the music is amazing as well, even though there aren't a ton of different musical tracks. In Japan, Konami took advantage of the FM sound chip that's built into the Famicom disk system to assist with the music and give it a slightly warmer feel compared to the cartridge versions. I like this game much more than Vampire Killer on the MSX2. If you have an idea of what to do, it's pretty darn entertaining. I feel like it's somewhat of a bad rap. Once you get used to how it works, it's honestly kind of addictive. I found myself always wanting to play the next area with my new powers. It's hardly perfect though, as it feels like a first attempt at a proper adventure game. If you want to experience it without spending a huge deal of time, then use a guide to help you. I think that everyone should at least give this game a good attempt. Castlevania is off to a great start, and it's one of the more popular franchises even this early into its existence. But the next time we'd see Castlevania would be in black and white on Nintendo's newfangled Game Boy portable system. Castlevania The Adventure was a launch game for the original Game Boy, released in late 1989. You play as Christopher Belmont in this one, though nowhere in the game or even on the box or in the manual does it tell you this, so you're just gonna have to take me at my word. If there's one thing that Christopher hates doing, it's moving. Like, at all. He moves very, very slowly throughout his entire journey, and you can just tell this is quite the chore for him. Supposedly, this was done to reduce the amount of blur on the Game Boy screen. It's okay though, because once you get used to it, this game is a blast. Okay, well, perhaps blast is the wrong word given this game's pacing, but it's really enjoyable. There have been some changes to bring Castlevania to the portable screen though. Gone are all the stairs. Instead, now you have ropes. Lots and lots of ropes. Also gone are your sub-weapons. You can still power up your whip here, but when you power it up the second time, it lets you shoot a projectile from it, which is really cool. But here's the catch. If you take any damage, it goes away and you'll have to power up your whip again. It doesn't stop there, of course. If you get hit again before powering back up, your whip goes back to its weakest form. Pretty cool! Actually, it's not cool, I don't like that. But that's the way the game works, and you'll just have to deal with it. There are only 4 stages here, and they're each pretty big with plenty of hidden areas and rooms to find. And of course, there are boss fights at the end of each. Some of these bosses might even take you a few times to figure out how to beat. Dracula himself can be pretty tricky as he keeps disappearing and reappearing, and you absolutely need to memorize this. This game introduces some new enemies into the series, like the rolling eyeballs. Not sure whose eyeballs they are, or if they're sentient beings with their own brains along with their own hopes and dreams, I don't know. Then there are these guys who spit out a slowly moving, ricocheting ball of energy that can be sometimes tough to avoid. The visuals are great for an early Game Boy title, though they can be a little sparse. The music is fantastic though. That seems to be a requirement for all proper Castlevania games. Even though this one is pretty slow, I still have a good time with it. This also got re-released on the Game Boy in Konami GB Collection Volume 1 in Japan. This one features some Super Game Boy enhancements if you play it on the Super Nintendo. It has a special border and its own custom color palette, which is basically just orange. Christopher also moves a little faster in this one, making it seem less sluggish. He's still pretty slow though. The Konami GB Collection was also released in Europe, and it was stripped of its Super Game Boy enhancements. However, if you play it on a Game Boy Color, the entire game is given a fresh new coat of paint with a nice color overhaul. And I swear, Chris moves a bit faster here than he even did on the Super Game Boy. At the same time though, it kind of feels like the game's just been overclocked, so the increase in speed varies, which can throw you off a bit. Still, this is a great way to play the game, especially if you love the original. Konami went back to the series' roots with Castlevania III Dracula's Curse in 1990 in North America. Once again, we have a straight-up action game, and this is the favorite game in the entire series for a lot of people. You play as Trevor Belmont, who is one of Simon's ancestors. You have the same power Simon did in the first game with similar sub-weapons. Instead of powering up your whip with a chain whip icon, you now collect a sword with 2 snakes or 1 snake wrapped around it, which I personally think looks like a chandelier. However, this time there are branching paths to choose from after clearing a lot of the stages, and even sometimes in the middle of a stage. Depending on which ones you choose, you'll eventually meet up with a character who offers to join your quest. There are 3 different additional characters. There's Grant, who can climb on walls, but more importantly can change direction mid-air during a jump, which gives you some flexibility in the control department if you need it. And trust me, you will. There's Sypha, who's a tad weak, but has some cool ice magic and can freeze water. Then there's Dracula's son Alucard, who is half human. He can turn into a bat and fly, as well as shoot fireballs. Each of these characters will help you reach places that Trevor himself can't. This game is absolutely huge with tons of stages everywhere. It almost feels overwhelming at times. There are 16 blocks in this one. It's also pretty difficult as the controls are still very primitive with the slight exception of Grant. Stairs going down can still be tricky. Oops. You just need to remember to press only down or you will die. Like I said, sometimes this game can be really difficult. You'll need a lot of practice for sure. In fact, it'll probably piss you off. You might even shut the game off in frustration. But after you calm down a little, you're going to get the urge to try again and you're going to get past the part that was troubling you. Fortunately, there are unlimited continues and a password feature, but they put you back at the beginning of a block. Needless to say, you're not walking through this one and it'll keep you busy for some time. The branching paths will certainly keep you coming back for more. The graphics are kind of a mixed bag here. On one hand, you have some really amazing looking areas like this one which have some really cool effects. On the other hand, there are a few areas like this one which only look extremely good. It's all still unmistakably Castlevania though, and the variety in these stages is amazing for a cartridge game. However, enemies are sometimes hard to see and the stairs that go down into the ground are often very difficult to make out unless you know that they're there. And the music here is some of the best in the series. Once again, the Japanese version uses external sound processing, this time in the form of the Konami VR6 chip. Nintendo was boneheaded and didn't allow an audio pass-through when designing the International NES for some reason, so Konami had to recompose the entire soundtrack. Still, either way, the game sounds awesome. The game is completely amazing, but it's not my personal favorite in the series. Maybe this is because I didn't play it until after the much more refined 16-bit Castlevanias. However, since it is the favorite of a great many people, you can rest assured that this game is no slouch in the series. Absolutely play this one. Okay, real quick before we move on, I just want to briefly mention Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth that's on the Wii. Some of you may have felt that I forgot to mention that back in the Castlevania Adventure segment, but it's not an 8-bit game, so that's why it's not in this episode. Anyway, the next Castlevania game that would be released isn't exactly Castlevania. Next up is Akumajo Special Boku Draculakun for the Famicom, otherwise known as Kid Dracula. This is a spin-off to the Castlevania series where you play as Dracula's kid, named Kid Dracula. No reference is made anywhere to you being Alucard, you're just Dracula's new kid I guess, and you're already a vampire. In this one, you're after someone called Garamoth. As you can tell just by looking at it, this is going for a more cutesified feel. It kind of plays like Ghouls and Ghosts on a very basic level. You shoot fireballs and you can even attack up and down, which is nice. You also have a charge attack and you can do this by holding the button down for a bit. The control feels a bit looser than the other Castlevania games, but it's still a tad stiff. Certainly nothing you can't get used to in a few minutes though. Each stage ends with a nice boss fight. After that, you gain a new charge power which is demonstrated to you. You can select between these with the select button. One of the abilities is a 5-way homing shot, which I found myself using quite a lot. Another lets you turn into a bat so you can fly around for a short time. Sometimes enemies will drop a coin. Between rounds you get a chance to play a bonus game for some extra lives if you've collected enough coins. Everything in the game is super cute and it's fun to play a lighthearted entry in the series. It looks super easy, but it's not. However, it's certainly not as tough as Castlevania III. Do you like underwater levels? How about ice levels? Of course you do! Who the hell doesn't love underwater and ice levels? You're in luck because this game has both. It also has this quiz section which I can't get past because I don't read Japanese. So this is kind of a deal breaker unless you have the Castlevania Anniversary Collection for the modern systems which has this game in English. I don't have that though. The graphics are pretty basic and they don't try to be more than they need to be. There is lots of flicker though, even on platforms that you jump on. There's a lot of variety in the stages, and apparently the game takes place in modern times since it has subways, cities, and even UFOs. Hell, even the guy from Splatterhouse is here. No, that's not Jason. Everyone knows that Friday the 13th ripped off Splatterhouse, even though Splatterhouse came way after Friday the 13th. That's just how my logic works. The music is super cutesy and it's fun until it starts to loop again and again, and then it can get a bit tiring. Honestly, the same goes for the game itself. It's neat for a bit, and then you just find yourself wanting to play something else. Back on the Game Boy, we got Castlevania II. No quest for Simon this time though, this is Belmont's Revenge. Dracula is back, and as far as you know, he kidnapped your son, so you go after him. You still play as Christopher, but you must have taken some pain medication or at least done a little stretching because you're much quicker and more limber this time around. Lots of things from the first game return here, including many of the enemies and definitely the ropes. Hell, there's even more ropes this time around. Who needs stairs anyway? Stairs are dumb. Now you get to choose the order you play the first 4 stages. This is awesome because if you're having trouble with a particular one, you don't have to go through the rest just to get there and practice. Well, I guess it doesn't help if you're having issues on the last castle though. You'll just have to buck up and learn it once you get there. You can still power up your whip so it can shoot projectiles, but touching the enemy no longer takes this away from you. At least not right away. Oh, and the sub-weapons are back. Well, at least the axe and the holy water are here. I'll take them. The Japanese version has the Cross of Fear instead of the axe, but someone at Konami's US offices thought that this was too similar to the whip's projectile attack, so they changed it to the axe, which flies in an arc. The graphics have taken a huge leap forward from the first Game Boy title. Each area is distinctly unique and gorgeous, even though it's all still in black and white. There are even some flicker tricks outside of the windows here to get a lighter shade of gray or green or whatever color your screen is, because the screen simply isn't fast enough to show the flicker. And do I even need to say it? Yes, I do. The music is outstanding once again, with plenty of memorable themes that might be some of the best tunes on the Game Boy. It goes without saying that everyone who has anything that can play Game Boy games should own this one. Like the first Castlevania adventure game, this one was also included on the Konami GB Collection. It's on Volume 3 in Japan. Once again, if you play it on the Super Nintendo, this one has its own border around the screen with an orange color palette. The Cross of Fear returns here instead of the axe, so that's interesting to mess around with. And once again, this one was also released in Europe for the Game Boy Color without the Super Game Boy enhancements. This time the volume numbers have been changed around, so it's on Volume 4 there. And yes, it's been colored, though this time it seems like they kind of rushed it a little, as there's not as much color as you might expect. It's still a really cool upgrade though, even though it's pretty basic. And they kept the Cross of Fear in this version as well. Definitely check it out if you can. By this time, Castlevania was already tearing it up on 16-bit consoles with tremendous results. However, there would still be some more 8-bit releases. all of which would be on the Game Boy. Kid Dracula also saw a release on the Game Boy, and it was even released outside of Japan. This is a sequel to the Famicom game, even though it feels like kind of a half-assed remake since a lot of things return. You're after Garamoth again, and you've forgotten all of your special abilities from the first game, except for your ability to turn into a bat. That's okay though, as you'll remember them as you progress through the game and learn new ones as well. This one is even slower, especially in the control department. It's not a game I would ever classify as responsive. It sometimes feels like the controls are stuck in molasses. Also, there's not much room on the screen for anything else besides you and your hitbox. Still, it's playable enough to where you can complete the stages with relative ease. Stages like the roller coaster are back, and it goes on for even longer here. Out of all the stages to extend, they extend this one. The thing is though, is that I get bored with this game rather quickly. Nothing about it makes me want to keep playing. You know what's weird though, is that I used to really like this game. I don't know if my gaming tastes have evolved or changed, or if someone just pissed in my Cheerios this morning, but it's just not as fun for me now as it was a few years ago. I really can't explain it. So I guess take everything I'm saying about this one with a grain of salt. I do like the music more here than in the Famicom version, so at least there's that. And the Splatterhouse guy is back as the boss. Otherwise, this game just doesn't do enough to stand out on its own as anything special. Finally, Castlevania Legends came out on the Game Boy all the way in 1997 in Japan and 1998 elsewhere. This was developed by the same team who had previously ported Symphony of the Night to the Saturn with less than stellar results. And it seems that less than stellar is the company motto because that's what this game is, sadly. You play as Sonia Belmont and it's your turn to rid the world of Dracula and all that stuff. When you first start playing, it doesn't feel bad. It's not as nice as Belmont's Revenge was, but still not bad. This will change quickly though. That's because the design of the game itself is lacking and not necessarily the controls themselves. Like the previous Game Boy Castlevania games, you can power up your whip and shoot a projectile. And look at that, a sub-weapon! The joke's on you, you can't use it. Instead, it's an artifact that you need to collect, and there's one to find in each stage. Actually, there are sub-weapons here, it's just handled differently. Once you defeat a boss, you're given what's called a soul weapon. You use these by pressing up and attack like you normally would. If you have multiple soul weapons, you can switch between them in the select screen. The problem is that most of these use a huge amount of hearts. There are a couple that I was never even able to use because I never had enough hearts to use them. But this Sonic Wave type of weapon only uses one heart and it's actually quite effective. Unfortunately, you don't get it until late in the game. Speaking of which, there are 6 stages to wander around. Well, technically 5, but the 5th stage is divided into 2 parts and they're all full of ropes. And these ropes are kind of maddening because flying enemies and even enemies on ropes will attack you as you climb. Often. It's really tough to fend them off. Sometimes when you strike a candle, you'll be taken into a room where you need to beat a ton of bad guys. You don't seem to get anything out of this if you win except losing a huge portion of your life bar. Honestly, I just commit suicide if I accidentally hit one of these candles. You basically have unlimited lives in this game. If you die, you start back at the last door that you came through. If you continue, you start at the last door that you came through. So yeah, unlimited lives. Oh, and notice how the boss has a life bar, but it never moves no matter how many times you hit him. You silly goose, that's not a life bar for the boss. What are you thinking? That's for the burning mode. If you press both buttons at once, you become invincible for a short time. You damage enemies if you touch them, and also your attacks are twice as powerful. That's pretty cool, but you can only use it once per life per level. At the beginning of the game, you can choose between standard and light modes. Light mode is an easier setting where you start with a fully powered up whip and never lose it no matter how many times you get hit. Combine this with the burning mode and you'll plow right through the game with very little trouble. The graphics have taken a large step down from Castlevania II and they're quite basic, especially for a game coming out so late in the system's life. There's not much that stands out here and even most of the enemies look like they're bored. The game is compatible with the Super Game Boy, and here it gets a generic yet pleasant border that's not at all distracting. The music opens with an altered version of the Bloody Tears theme, and honestly, it isn't bad at all. But the other stages have forgettable and sometimes even outright annoying music that'll make you want to turn your sound down fast. It's too bad that this game ended up the way it did. Koji Igarashi removed it from official Castlevania canon back when he was in charge of such things. I wish they had waited to put it on the Game Boy Color and given it to a better team. I think if that had happened, it would have been remembered better. Yes, that's right, I'm actually saying that if this game had been more gooder, it would have been better received. It's not more gooder though, it's not, it's really not. And there you go, those are all of the 8-bit Castlevania games, and my favorite obviously has to go to Castlevania III, Dracula's Curse, and Castlevania II, Belmont's Revenge on the Game Boy is pretty kick-ass as well. And I've already covered all of the 16-bit Castlevanias, as well as all of the Metroidvanias in different episodes, so check them out if you haven't already. And there are still a lot of Castlevania games to cover, but I can't really group them into themed episodes like I've been doing, so I'm not sure what to call it. Maybe like the other Castlevanias? Do you have a better idea? I sure hope so, because that sounds kind of dumb. If you do, let me know, and also let me know what your favorite 8-bit Castlevania game is. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack.
Wow, that was
Sorry I'm late, but I made it. That's right, I'm an 8-bit Castlevania too. So where do I go to show off what I've got? Seriously, I'm probably twice as good as all of you, right?
Get 'em, boys!